Hey guys, Joe Miles here with Osseo Gear. This is the Mission Whitetail podcast. We're going to be doing a deep dive into what it truly takes to kill these mature bucks. We're going to step outside the box and look at the why for gear, tactics, training, and more importantly, the mindset from over 35 years of chasing these magnificent animals all over North America. Thank you for following along and welcome to Mission Whitetail. All right, guys, as always, we like to get right to the meat and potatoes of the podcast. I've got my good buddy Don Higgins on today, and we are going to talk about small farms. The big trend lately across the entire Midwest and really just about anywhere is this public land stuff. Guys are, it's kind of a badge of honor to go and hunt public land now. And after going through all these trade shows this year, I've just heard horror story after horror story after horror story about guys using their vacation, their 1 week or 2 week vacation and going out to hunt public land somewhere and just being overrun with people. And, the lease thing is something, Don, you and I have talked about quite a bit. And sometimes those things can work out and sometimes they can't. So what I wanted to talk with you about today is the guys that have decided to invest in, they might be getting to a point in their life where they can afford a smaller farm, like 50 to 100 acres, that type thing, nothing gigantic. And they're looking in to finding a small farm, a starter farm to get after some of these bigger deer. So if it's all right with you, Don, how do you feel about talking about small farms today?
Well, that's kind of what I specialize in. On my consulting jobs, probably the average property that I look at is, I'm going to guess, somewhere around 80 to 100 acres. I've looked at them as small as 8 acres, believe it or not. And then I've looked at them at over 1,000 acres, but the majority of them come in like the 80 to 160 range, and probably right around that 100 acres is probably the sweet spot where most of them are. And that's basically what I'm hunting here in Illinois for the most part. Now, I do hunt some public land. I've got 2 tracts of public land that I plan to be looking at this fall. I've already scouted them out, had cameras there this past season. And if I go in there this coming fall and there's a shooter buck on camera, then I'm going to be hunting some public. But the majority of my hunting is going to be on smaller farms in the Midwest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't trying to run down public hunting by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that guys that can go into these public places and kill deer, I mean, that's incredible. It's really something special. And to me, you got to have a lot of time if you want to be serious about it. It can be, and it can be very frustrating because you get everything dialed in. You've got your exact spot set up, and you get set up, 45 minutes before daylight, and here, 8 o'clock in the morning, here comes 2 hunters right through there, and that's just part of it, right?
Right. And when it comes to public land, one of the things I do is I put out cameras looking for human activity as much as the bucks I want to hunt. And once I see a certain amount of human activity, actually, once I get the second picture of a human on a camera, I just wipe out that, not only that exact spot, but, kind of a wide area around that. And
Yeah.
it's really tough to find the spots where there's no people, but that's what the mature bucks are doing. And if there is no such a spot, there's probably not going to be a mature buck there. And I personally am not going to go to public land just to shoot a buck. If I'm going to shoot a buck, it's going to be a good one. And one of my goals has been to shoot a giant on public, and the hard part is finding that giant.
Yep.
It's not easy to kill them by any means, but the hardest part is finding them. You'll spend years looking for a public land giant.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I think a lot of the guys are at peace with. They're fine if they go 2, 3, 4 seasons without killing a deer, or they may shoot a couple doe, for the freezer, throw some does in the freezer, but but their goal is like a goal you have of killing a giant on public land, and that might take 3, 4, 5 years to do it. And
Hmm.
to each his own.
Yeah, there's a lot of years that I'm not going to even sit a stand one time on public land, but I will have numerous cameras on public land just monitoring things. And when the day comes that a giant shows up, well, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, let's get back on these small, purchase farms. I've just got a list of questions here, Don, that I wanted to go through, and something they're intriguing to me because I'm actually looking for some things. I've got a little deal working in Kansas now, and looking around at some other states. But to start with, for a guy that's really looking for top end deer, smaller farms, what would be your three top states that you would look into?
Oh, I would say Ohio, Kansas, and those for sure. Probably Iowa. Of
Yep.
course, with Iowa, you got the situation where it's so hard to draw a tag. You might only, even though you own the property, if you don't live there, if you're not a resident of Iowa, you're only going to get to hunt that farm maybe once every 3 to 5 years. And in some units, it's even longer than that. You may be looking once every 6 or 7, at least for the archery season. Now,
Sure.
some of the other tags are a little bit easier to get, but even so, you're not going to probably be hunting that property every year.
Gotcha. So I've heard you mention Ohio multiple times. It seems like you really, really like Ohio.
Right. Well, Ohio's got a lot going for it in the management. It's got a 1 buck limit, and it's got the gun season after the rut. So that allows more bucks to reach older age classes. The thing that hurts Ohio, in my opinion, as far as the quality, is the bait piles.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young bucks get shot off bait piles, and if they would eliminate those corn piles in Ohio, I think it would be the #1 state in very short order for giant bucks. But it is what it is, and today I put it right up there at the top. I think it's overlooked. It's crazy to me how many hunters from the East Coast travel right through Ohio to hunt states like Illinois. And
Yeah.
being a resident of Illinois and also owning property in Ohio, I can tell you that there's no way I would drive through Ohio to get to Illinois.
Yeah. 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 For me, being in South Carolina, you know, to get to big deer, it's Southern Ohio. That's a 7.5 hour drive, or way Western Kentucky, and that's also a 7.5 hour drive. And that's the closest. I mean, yeah, there's some pockets down in Georgia and places like that, but far as traditional big buck areas, that's from being in the middle of South Carolina, I'm a 7.5 hour drive to get to them.
Uh-huh. And that's something to factor in. If a guy's going to buy property out of state, if you got a drive that's less than 5 hours versus one that's say 10 or 12 hours, well, you could wake up one morning and look at the weather and decide the conditions are great to hunt your property, and you could be there hunting it that afternoon,
Yep.
as long as it's not that far away. So that's always something to take into consideration.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, for me, I love Kansas, and looking at that farm right now in Kansas, but that's a 17-hour drive for me, so that's a real commitment. Or then the
Hmm.
flight thing, and when you fly out there, then you're conditioned with rental cars. You don't have all your gear with you, and it becomes an issue. So that's a very
Hmm.
good point. Having, for us southern guys that don't have the opportunity to get into that big buck country without having to travel, that's a very good point. It's looking
Yep.
at areas that you can get to in 7, 8 hours, that you can leave at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and be sitting in the stand that afternoon.
Right. So, I've been drawing Iowa, or at least preference points, for several years now, and occasionally I'll draw an Iowa tag. I can be in eastern Iowa in like 4 hours, or I could go to western Iowa and I'm looking at about 7 to 8 hours. So I've chose to hunt the eastern side of the state, although I think there's some advantages on the western side of the state, because I can wake up in the morning and check the weather and see something that I wasn't anticipating. I can jump in my truck and I can be hunting that afternoon in eastern Iowa. So I mean, that's just something that you need to look at if you're going to buy a property out of state. How long is it going to take you to get there? Because the closer it is, the more you're going to get to hunt.
Yeah, without a doubt. All right, so moving on, what would you look for as far as location or surroundings? Like okay, you said okay, Kansas is the spot. Let's just use that. And I need to drill down in Kansas to an area, to a location, to surroundings. What would be what are you going to look for to start with?
Well, I've often said that when it comes to buying or even hunting a property, it's way more important what lays around that property instead of what's on that property. If you own the property, you can change what's on the property. If it needs food, you can go in with a dozer and you can clear out as big a food plot as the terrain will allow. If it needs cover, you can plant switchgrass or whatever, and you can create cover. But the thing you cannot change is what's on the other side of the boundary. What's your neighbors doing? So, I've said that I could take a 5 acre wide open field without a single tree on it, and I could turn it into a paradise if that 5 acres sit right against 1,000 acre sanctuary where no hunting's allowed. I'd just put 5 acres of food there and I'd be shooting deer all day long.
Yeah.
So what lays around the property is way more important than what's on it.
Mhm.
And that becomes really critical on a small property because you just don't have that much room for error. And your neighbors, even though they're never on your side of the fence, can absolutely destroy a small property. Um, it's kind of crazy, but a lot of us on the dream team, the consulting dream team that works with me, we've done multiple visits for the same landowners, and you know, without a without exception that I can even think of, every time we go back to look at a second property for the client, the second property is always way better than the first property. They learn what it takes, after we put the pieces of the puzzle together, and the second one, boom, they find what they need, and it's way better than the first one. And I think what a lot of guys don't realize, or they just don't think about, is that every property has a ceiling. No matter what you do, this is as good as it's going to get. You're never going to go above that. So you got to find a property with a high ceiling, and what lays around that property has a huge impact on the ceiling.
Gotcha. No, that makes real good sense. That really does. Now, let's say we've narrowed down our state, we've narrowed down our location. We know that the neighbors are good, or we've got sanctuary. What if you've got two or three of those, which is unlikely to find that, but let's just hypothetically say we found two or three of those. Is there habitat on that property that you want to see, or that is, hey, if you've got this, it makes it so much easier to do everything? What habitat on that farm are you looking for? Is it timber, CRP, cut over, just a bare dirt feel like you talked about, like a blank slate? What would be your thing? Oh my God, this is it. It's got this on it.
Well, you gotta. Another thing I tell my clients is if you want to kill big deer consistently, you have to hunt them on the properties where they bed. Now, I gave an example with the 5 acres and the 1,000 acre sanctuary, which is extreme. But
Yeah,
typically, you got to have those deer bedded. The bucks you want to kill, you need to get them bedded on your property. So having good bedding cover is absolutely critical. And I think most deer hunters recognize what good deer habitat looks like, but I don't think they recognize what a good deer hunting property looks like. And there's a difference. A good deer hunting property, it has good deer habitat, but it's also how that property lays out, how you can access it, what lays around it. I can't tell you how many clients' properties I've visited that has great deer habitat, but the property does not lay out good at all. And, you got neighbors sitting the fence, or it's just you got poor access and just one thing after another. So the layout of the property is really critical. But having that bedding cover on the property is absolutely key as well.
Yep. And you think that more like cutovers, or you think it's a CRP, or what would be your favorite bedding cover to look for?
Well, my favorite is a old cattle pasture that's not had cattle on it for a number of years, and it started growing up with weeds and briars and saplings and you know things like that. Um, the deer just absolutely love that kind of cover, and if you can find that, it just it gets better and better with each passing year as that vegetation just becomes thicker and thicker. What I've seemed to notice is that those old cattle pastures get better and better every year until the ground is shaded to the point where there's no grass whatsoever left.
Mhm.
So if you've still got some clumps of grass scattered amongst that thick cover, it's great. But once it gets shaded to the point that grass is gone, the deer don't seem to like it as well. So
So
old
that's a
cattle pastures are great, but a cut over, a clear cut, thick cover is what it's all about. The thicker, the
Yep,
better.
gotcha. Yep, that makes good sense. Where would you rate water? Like, how important is it to have water on your place?
Well, on a small property, I'd like to have water on any property, no doubt about it. But on a smaller property, I don't think it's quite as critical. I would definitely provide water if you could, provided that you don't have to go in and be filling tanks. So on a small property, human intrusion is just magnified. A little bit of human intrusion on a small property is, like a deer drive on a big property. I mean, it takes so little. I think that's one thing that deer hunters don't understand is how little human intrusion it takes to make a mature buck totally change what he's been doing. So if you got to go in and you got to fill a water hole all the time, that's enough human intrusion right there to send a mature buck packing.
Yeah,
So I'm all for having water, and whether it's a man-made water hole or a creek or a pond or whatever, it doesn't really matter as long as you don't have to go in and fill it with water.
yeah. No, that makes good sense. And yeah, I mean it's definitely, I think it can't be a negative to have it, but uh, probably not a deal breaker if it's in the right area, you got the right neighbors, you got the right habitat, and there's water nearby. I
Exactly.
would you agree with that? So it's
Oh,
not a deal.
absolutely. Yeah, a deer can bed on your 40, 80, 100 acres, whatever, all day long. And then when the sun goes down, he can jump the fence and go grab water elsewhere. Same way with food. Now, I want to feed them on the property, but that doesn't mean that you have to have giant food plots. It's way more important to get him bedded there than anything else. And then once you get him bedded there, you want to hold him for as many daylight hours as you can. But if he's got water somewhere in the area where he can get a drink every night, and he'll be fine.
Gotcha. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Other than getting a Don Higgins
Mm.
dream team or Don Higgins himself in a with a real world plan on your property, once you bought that property, and I think you answered this with the last little segment we did there. What would be the number one improvement that you would do? And I'm already seeing a trend here. I'm going to say that is create great bedding cover.
Absolutely, you got to get them bedded there.
Yeah.
So whatever you can do to enhance your bedding cover, if you've got space where you can diversify the cover, like maybe have a thick growed up cattle pasture, and then you have a timber that you go in and you do a TSI cut to make it thicker, and then you have an open area where you plant some switchgrass. Well, one thing that I've noticed, especially on my own property, is that individual bucks will have a preference in the type of cover they want to bed in. So I've got bucks on my farm, or I've had bucks over the years on my farm that they preferred to bed in the switchgrass. And the majority of days when they came out of their beds in the afternoon, they were coming out of the switchgrass. And then I've had other bucks that didn't seem to care about the switchgrass whatsoever. They would come out of thick wooded cover every afternoon. So if you've got diversity of bedding cover, a buck comes along, no matter what he likes, you can provide it. well, there's a good chance you can hold that deer.
That's a good point. You give him multiple options, and you can certainly do that on a small property.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. I think I know the answer to this one, but I'm going to fire it out there. If your budget would allow you to buy 100-acre farm, let's say, that's what you're looking at. Would you rather have that bigger property, that 100-acre farm, or would you rather say, okay, there's a 70-acre property over here that looks really good, and then there's a 30-acre property about 45 minutes away that looks good too? Would you rather, try to get into two different deer herds, or take that 100-acre tract that's bigger and really soup it up, if you will?
Well, obviously, it's going to come down to the specific properties, but without a doubt, I would take the multiple properties every time because I feel that if the property lays out good, I can get it doesn't matter if it's 30 acres or 100 acres. If a property lays out good, I feel that I can get at least one of the best bucks in the area to be bedding there in daylight hours. So if I've got two, then I've got one of the best bucks in area A bedding there, and then I've got one of the best bucks in area B bedding on the other one. And that just doubles my odds that one of those is going to be a giant. So, you got to spread your efforts out a little bit if possible, um, because it allows you to hunt different deer herds, and your odds are much better of one of the bucks on one of the properties being a giant.
Yeah. And another thing is, like, maybe you get a EHD outbreak or something, and your 100-acre farm gets destroyed. Whereas if you're 45 minutes, maybe it doesn't even take 45 minutes, maybe it takes 30 minutes,
Hmm.
25, 30 miles away, EHD doesn't hit in that area as hard. And you know when you were growing up, we don't really have EHD, and I'm probably talking wrong here. We probably have had EHD in South Carolina, but I can't remember a big die off from EHD. When you were younger, did you have EHD in Illinois that you can remember? What do you think has caused this?
Well, I think we did not have it that I can ever remember. I don't remember when the first outbreak I remember was. I remember the biggest outbreak we ever had was 2012, but I've got to guess it's probably the warmer temperatures. We don't have the cold winters that we had back when I was growing up, and I'm just guessing that that's kind of it's all starts with that midge gnat. That midge gnat is what um, carries the EHD virus, and I'm just guessing that the warmer temperatures have allowed those midge gnats to kind of expand their range from southern states up north. And I'm not an expert on EHD. That's
Oh,
just my
right. Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. I was just, I was thinking, I've been hunting out there in the Midwest a long time, and I just can't remember it until, like you said, around 2012, it hit Kansas too, and it blew up the area we hunt in Kansas. And I know it really hurt you there at your home farm, and it takes a while for it to build back.
Oh yeah, yeah. An EHD outbreak, you can just about figure on. You're looking at least a minimum of 3 years of poor hunting, and then probably more like 5 years of poor hunting. When we had that outbreak in 12, I mean it was depressing for about 3 years afterwards as that herd built back up.
Yeah. Yeah, let's fingers crossed that this year we're in good shape.
Right.
But there's nothing we can do. We wishful
No.
thinking, right? If it happens, we just deal with it and move on.
Yeah, another factor that might have played into that was the larger deer herds that we have today. We didn't have the numbers of deer back in my younger years that we have today. So the the larger deer herd might have helped spread that disease, up further north. But again, I don't know. I'm not an
Yeah,
expert. Just a
yeah,
couple theories to throw out there.
yeah, and that's where having diversification in where you hunt is important. You
Right.
50 here, 30 there, 20 over here. That gives you an opportunity to avoid that. So yeah, that
Right.
I agree there 100%. Let's see. All right, so small properties. food, what is your go-to food? Because to me, and this might be my naive thinking, small property is probably going to equal smaller food plots. Maybe not in every case, but in a lot of them. So they're going to get hammered. They're going to get browsed on. So what is your go-to plan, if you will, on these smaller farms as far as what you're going to plant?
Well, I like to diversify the food just like I do the bedding cover. And I always want greens and grains. So for the greens, it could be a number of things. It could be clover or alfalfa. It could be a cereal grain mix in the fall, you know, something with rye, oats, or whatever, brassicas. Um, on the grain side, you know, soybeans or corn. Typically on a small property with a smaller plot, it's a little bit harder to grow those grains because they can get wiped out when they're growing stage, you know, and they never reach maturity where they produce much, if any, grain. But if possible, I definitely want some grain on there. Another thing that comes into play is when do I expect to be hunting that property? So if it's early season, you know, those green food sources are really prime then. So I'll definitely want to dedicate more acreage to the greens. If I'm going to be late season hunting, you know, soybeans is about the best draw when it gets cold.
Yep.
Definitely want some soybeans there because I'll tell you, in the late season, it's a time of the season I think a lot of hunters overlook. Um, I'll have new bucks. I'll have more new bucks on my farm in the late season than I will ever have in the rut. And
Mm-hmm.
that's hard for a lot of guys to believe, but it's true. And it's all because of the food sources. So, you know, let's go back to Iowa, you know, where it's hard to draw an archery tag, but those late muzzleloader tags are a little bit easier to draw. If you've got a small property in Iowa and you're going to plan on drawing those late um, muzzleloader tags, then I would definitely dedicate everything to soybeans, all your food plot acreage to soybeans to get those bucks in there late. However, on the other hand, if you're going to be hunting there early during archery season, I want some green food sources in there. So diversify as much as possible. You know, planting fruit trees where you can stick fruit trees. You might have a spot that's really not big enough to go in and plant a food plot, but it's big enough for 3 or 4 pear or apple trees or persimmons or whatever. Stick them in there. And in that regards, if you can supply things like that that the deer can't find anywhere else in the neighborhood, you've just further set your property apart. So, you know, during that time of the season when the pears are ripe, for example, the deer are going to be all over them. If you're the only guy in the neighborhood that's got pears, well, guess what? You're going to have a lot of the deer.
Yeah, no, that's good. And you know, another real world example is you and I were talking by text earlier in the week or into last week about that little track in Ohio. And you know, we were talking about most of the stuff around there was going to be beans, and we were going to plant beans as well. And you know, the idea came up that hey, let's wait maybe 2 weeks after the farmers plant all their beans and then drop our beans in so that the deer get on the farmer's beans first, and it gives ours time to get up because it's only going to be 5 or 6 acres that we're able to plant. And I thought that was a really good piece of advice.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, you can just let the deer get focused on the farmer's crop. And then once they're all focused heading there every afternoon, then you slip in and you get your plot going. And you're not going to prevent 100% of that browse pressure, but at least you can cut it down some by getting those deer focused on it. And they would really rather feed in a bigger field anyway, for the most part. So you can get them focused on other food sources in the area, and it's not going to be during hunting season, so that's not going to bother us whatsoever. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and then you know if it does get hammered down, which we are anticipating, you know we're going to do everything we can, but it's a big deer herd in that area. It's going to probably get hammered, but planting it late will help, and then coming back in after that and doing the deadly dozen, you know, for the fall.
Right. Yeah, the Deadly Dozen's one of my favorites. I mean, my 3 favorite plots are real world Gen 2 soybeans, the real world NutriCrave corn, and the Deadly Dozen. And with that, that's basically my rotation on my farm. It's a 3-way rotation, but that Deadly Dozen, there's 12 different plants there.
Yeah.
And there's something that the deer are hitting from the time it comes out of the ground clear through till the next spring. With those 12 plants, the window of peak palatability for each of those 12 is a little bit different, and you've got deer hitting it all season long.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Is that you can try the beans but if it doesn't work, or if they get eaten or you get a drought or whatever, you got a second chance.
Right. Yep, that's the good thing about a spring food plot. If it fails, you come back in late summer with a fall food plot.
Yeah. So yeah, that's good. Okay. Let's see, Don. I just got a couple more for you. Let's see. Let me get into my notes on my phone here. Uh, let's see. All right. And I think this is I always when I talk about small farms, I always go back to that 29-acre tract I had in Illinois. There
Mm-hmm.
was zero food on it. There was a older cattle pasture and just a big CRP like bottom in there. It was 29 acres. Never did one thing to it other than stay out of there. You know,
Mm-hmm.
nobody went in that thing. There was a little old lady walking path around the edge. They walked every afternoon that the deer completely, were used to those ladies walking that walking path. But as far as getting into that sanctuary, nobody ever went in there. I went in there and literally I probably hunted that thing 12 times in 3 years and shot three giants, back to back to back in there. And so it, I, I don't, do you think it's better on these really small ones, that are like 20, 10, 20 years, just to have that nasty uh, bedding area, just thicket that's got a good funnel or good access to hunt it? Or if you own it, do you want to try to get into something like that and put a little bit of food in? I worry that you take something that's just so perfect, like if you own that and you go in there and kind of overdo it and you put your food in, you go in and put trees or whatever it may be, you know, to me it's almost like if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I'm with you 100%. I think a lot of new landowners, they've been, for the most part, like my consulting clients, they've been successful at something in life. I've consulted for professional athletes, major business owners, things like that. And these people, the harder they worked at life, the more successful they became. And then they get a deer property and they think they've got that mentality that the more they do on that property, the better it's going to become. Well, that works to a certain point. But there's a tipping point. So your property starts at a certain level and you start improving things and it gets a little bit better. But then you reach the tipping point and all of a sudden it crashes and the property is actually worse off than the day you started. And it all boils down to human intrusion, how much human intrusion you're putting on that property. So again, I said it earlier, but again, I don't think most deer hunters understand how little human intrusion it takes for a mature buck to be totally bumped off a property. I think most deer hunters have bumped more mature bucks off of properties they hunt than they even know. They probably didn't even know the buck was there to start with in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
cases. Now with cameras today, that's probably not as common as it was 20 years ago. Every deer hunter seems to have an arsenal of trail cameras, but I'm sure back, in my youth, I bumped a lot of mature bucks off of properties that I didn't even know the mature buck was there to begin with. And it was all because of human pressure. And you make a great point. Some of my best hunting properties, I haven't done a thing to. Some of the biggest bucks on my wall, they weren't from managed properties whatsoever. They were from little permission pieces where I didn't even have the opportunity to do anything. All I could do was go in and hang stands and hunt, and that was all I was allowed to do. And in those situations, I'd get my stands ready. I didn't even take my stands down every year. I'd use chains instead of straps, or use something that's safe that you can leave from year to year. Maybe every couple of years, go in, loosen the chain or whatever. But I didn't even go into those properties to scout or anything like that once I knew the property. And I'm sure that's your situation on this place. Once you learned where your tree stands needed to be, you didn't, when you first showed up to hunt that property each fall, you didn't walk every square foot of that property scouting it out to see if you could find rubs or scrapes or anything. You knew where you needed to be. You knew the wind you needed to hunt. You knew the access point to get, or the access route to get to that stand. And once you know it, you gain nothing by going in and doing extra stuff. In fact, you often harm your chances. And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of small landowners make, is they don't understand how little human intrusion it takes to ruin that property for mature bucks. Yeah, they can go out and do all kinds of projects and put cameras out, and they can get pictures of deer and young bucks, even 3-year-old bucks, and they think they're on the right path because they're increasing deer numbers, but they're not increasing the number of mature bucks.
Yeah.
And a mature buck is a totally different animal, and that human intrusion factor is so critical that it comes into play. And you give a perfect example of where you're better off just doing nothing than coming in and planting food plots or whatever.
Yeah, I would go June or July, I would go out there, redo the straps on the stand, put my 3 cameras in there, and then I would leave. And then I would be back Halloween because I knew that's when I needed to be in there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started hunting it, cell cams were just coming around, so I'd have to sneak in there and pull cards out. But and then it got to where we had cell cams in there, and that made it so much easier. But yeah, I mean that was one, and um, I think a, I think somebody I haven't obviously been out there and hunted that thing since I think 2014. But so yeah, I don't know exactly what all is going out there now, but I guess if it's still being left alone, it's still a really good spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing you pointed out was the human activity around the edge of that property with the walking path. Deer can become used to humans. That they can live right under people's noses. But when they do, that deer knows the routine. He knows where those people are supposed to be, and as long as people stay where they're supposed to be, he's fine. He'll lay there 50 or 100 yards from them and let it happen. But as soon as one of those people gets off of the routine, then it's a whole different ball game. The
Yeah.
buck is up and gone.
Yep. Yeah. It's crazy how they pattern us as much as we pattern them.
Right. Yep.
They're unbelievable creatures. You know, they're just one more example of that is we've got a hunt club where there are 12 guys that hunt, and it's mostly all rifle hunters. There's a couple guys in there that bow hunt, but it's the same routine, right? Saturday morning, go to the gate, chain opens, bangs the gate, drive the truck into the home site, hop on the 4-wheeler, crank the 4-wheeler up, drive out to your stand, 100 yards from the stand, walk to the stand, climb up, whatever happens that morning, climb down, 4-wheeler back by 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, out the gate everybody goes.
Mm-hmm.
So I started going in there and waiting until 9:30 in the morning and parking outside the gate and riding an e-bike around the gate into my spot and started killing some mature bucks on that heavily pressured property between 10 and 2 because
Right.
that's when they started moving. It was amazing how I mean you could almost to the hour, especially if you're in there when the guys were coming out on their 4-wheelers. All right, the deer are going to start moving.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing.
Well, the only animal that can adapt quicker than a mature whitetail buck is probably a coyote, but I remember one situation years ago where I found a situation where there was a house and a barn, a couple outbuildings, and in that house lived an old lady. She was probably in her 80s or whatever. You almost never seen the lady out. I mean, she stayed in her house, never out. The barn, you know, it had trees growing out of the foundation, weeds growing up around the barn and such. And behind the barn, there was a little area, probably no bigger than, you know, the average house, where the farmer that was farming her ground didn't mow up close to that barn. And there was a little patch of brush right behind her barn. And then there was like a mowed grass waterway that jutted out from that little bit of cover into open ag fields, and beyond there was some timber and such. But I got to thinking one day, and this is way back when I was still hunting with a gun, so I'd have been in my 20s, probably early 20s actually. But I got to thinking one day, you know what? I seen, well, actually, what happened was I seen a rub on one of the trees that was growing out of the foundation of that old barn, and I could see it from the road. And one day during gun season, I knocked on the lady's door, asked her if she would mind if I would hunt on her farm. She kind of looked at me like I was nuts because all she had was those few trees behind her barn. And she says, "Yeah, go ahead." And I walked around the corner of the barn, and there was a sliding door on the backside of that barn, and the door was open, and it opened up into a fairly sizable area where cattle had used to go in. And as I walked around the corner of that barn, I busted a buck, and that buck was actually bedded inside the barn, looking out. And he come busting out of there, and he was a mature buck. He wasn't like a 2-year old. I mean, this was a 4-year old plus buck, and he comes busting out of there and runs right down the waterway. And in my youth, I shot at him running away and didn't hit him whatsoever. I came back the very next day to see if that buck would be back, and I'm telling you, I come around the corner and that same buck busts out of that barn again.
I'll be
And
darned.
come back the third day, guess what? That buck is nowhere
And
around third
yeah,
day.
he found him a new house.
Yep, you might get 2 chances, but you're not going to get 3. But that story shows how little cover it takes for a mature buck to feel safe. And literally, that cover behind that barn was no bigger than your average house. I mean, it wasn't even as big as a yard. It was just probably a tenth of an acre, maybe. You know, right behind that barn. But that was enough for that mature buck. And I know what he was doing. He was coming right up that waterway in the dark every morning before the sun was up, and he was bedding right there. And he probably had done it for a couple of years, I bet.
And nobody had
And
ever messed with him.
but yeah, you put the pressure on, and I actually I even went back to that place years for consecutive years after that. Never seen another deer there.
I'll be
It,
darned.
2 hunts, I ruined the place. So
Yeah,
uh,
those are the best lessons learned, aren't they?
I learned everything the hard way. I'm telling you, I ruined more properties than I can even remember, and
Uh,
that was just one of them.
yeah, I look back on some of the stuff I did and tried and listened to people. I won't get into names, but the ground hunting thing, the slipping through the woods, and
Yeah,
just the dumb stuff that I did. That now you look back on and you're just amazed that was sold.
right. Well, yeah, there's all kinds of junk products out there, but
Yeah, without a
I think,
doubt.
you know, when you talk about small properties, the human intrusion factor is magnified. You just can't get away with what you typically would on, you know, even like a 160, 200 acre property. You can get away with 3 times what you can on a 40-acre property. And human intrusion is very critical on a 200-acre property.
Sure.
Well, you magnify that by about 3 times, and now you're talking a 40-acre property.
Yeah, it's hard. You spend 6 figures on a farm, right? And
Hmm.
you want to get in there and use it and enjoy it. And so it's really kind of almost counterintuitive. You're like, wait a minute, I got all my investment, my life savings in this property, and I want to go in there and enjoy it. And you're hurting it more than you're helping.
And the other mistake I see guys make is they got a small property And well, there's two mistakes really. One, they want to take too many people. So they've got 40 acres and they want to take two buddies every time they go hunt it. That's a
Yep.
recipe for disaster. That's never ever going to work.
Yep.
Might as well totally forget that if you want to shoot mature deer. And then the other thing is they think that they've got to have a stand for every possible wind direction. So I'm driving to, 10 hours or whatever to my property in another state, and when I'm there, I'm going to hunt. And it doesn't matter what the wind direction is. I got to have a stand for every wind direction. Well, most of the time, a small property is not going to set up for every wind direction. There's going to be wind directions where you're going to just have to go somewhere else that day, find public land in that neighborhood or get a permission piece in that neighborhood or whatever. But if you think you got to hunt your property every single day, no matter what the wind direction is, that's a recipe for failure when it comes to mature deer.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Don, let's see, I got two more, and I think we can be pretty quick on these. Let's see, the first one. All right, you bought your farm, you've got everything set up, you've got an area that you're going to be able to put some food in, do some improvements. What is your go-to starter equipment that a guy needs, like a first time quote unquote food plotter, or a guy that's gonna do that? He's excited, he's got him a farm, he's got a budget to get a little bit of equipment. What are you going to tell him to get?
Well, it depends on his budget. If he's got the budget for a small tractor, that's absolutely the way to go. And then you're going to need a sprayer for sure. You're gonna need something to work the ground at minimum. You could get by with a no-till drill if you can afford one of those, if that works into your budget. But if not, you're going to need you could use an old disc to work the ground. You can buy an old farm disc fairly cheap. You can plant a lot of different food plots by just broadcasting the seed with a hand seeder, where you turn the handle and it broadcasts it that way, and then drag something over the top of it. For the guy on the tightest budget, you're going to need a sprayer of some sort, whether it's on an ATV or even a backpack sprayer that you're doing by hand. You're going to need something to knock down the vegetation, a mower. I've seen guys use their lawnmower, their riding lawnmower. But you can make a pretty decent plot by going in, spraying the weeds. I'm talking about an area that's not a wooded area, but like a open weedy area. Go in there and spray the weeds and let those weeds die, and then come back and mow that dead vegetation and put a layer of dead thatch on the ground, and then broadcast something like oats or a brassica mix right on top of that dead vegetation that you've just mowed up. Um, Oats are super easy to grow. You could throw them out on the road and get a rain, they're going to turn green.
Gotcha.
And the same way with brassicas, if you get a good heavy rain, that little seed is going to get good seed to soil contact, and you're going to get something. So, a guy with the smallest budget, if he's got a backpack sprayer, a hand spreader, and a lawnmower, he can make a decent plot.
Gotcha. Okay. So there's all different levels, but just because you can't buy a 50 horsepower tractor doesn't mean you can't get in the game and get some good stuff in there.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So in closing, obviously I want to get a plug in here for Real World. ICO Gear is a dealer for Real World now. I know you knew that, but
Hmm.
guys, it's really getting to be the time. And if you're in the South Carolina, Columbia area, I've got a bunch of the Maximizer Mineral in. We've got the Dixie Dozen for the fall. And then we've also got a bunch of the NutriCrave feed corn, because we're in South Carolina and a lot of guys do some feeding. So guys, if you need any of the Real World products, we can get the Gen 2 soybeans, we can get the corn, we can get everything. So we've got it here at ICO. So swing by the shop, you can check out some of our clothes, and then also pick up what you need for your food plots this spring and this fall.
Yeah, that's awesome. We appreciate having you on board, and our dealer network just continues to grow, just like the Osseo brand is growing. So We appreciate all our customers and appreciate our dealers as well. So thanks,
Yes,
Joe.
sir. Well, no, we enjoy it. Well, Don, thank you so much. I know as busy as our schedules are, it's hard to pick a time every now and again, but I'm so thankful to have you on today and really look forward to the next one.
Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. Always good talking with you.
All right, buddy. Appreciate it.